Incision is a title that has been on my radar for a good while now. Probably mainly because the art style looks like it was done with office pens on concrete. When I opened the game, it quickly made it clear that the sandbox-style murder rooms were in the forefront, with the story taking the back burner. It acts as more of a supplementary, an attempt to explain why you were fighting Bloodshit Killinator and his many guys with really slow saw blades. Unfortunately, the game isn't exclusively cryptic green lore sparkles, which, by the way, didn't explain the plot clearly, and I honestly don't think they were meant to. There's something to be said for the gameplay as well. I'd say I rate the gameplay as a solid pretty nice, which is probably like a 7.5 or an 8 or something. The weapon roster is one of the best I've used, with cool alt fires and like actual reason to switch off the shotgun. I was gonna say something about the shotgun's alt fire not being that interesting, but that was more of a nitpick. I don't really want to explain every weapon's mechanics, so here's a tier list. Play the game if you want an explanation. I found the movement hits the limit of its depth pretty quickly. It has a similar sort of speed as Half-Life or Quake, but it lacks all the momentum those games had. I think the player having perfect air movement feels somewhat archaic, but it also feels weirdly fresh, since it's so rare to see. Having played with this for quite a while now, I think I get why they did this. It makes the combat feel fast, with no need for a dodge or roll. Your focus is moved to aiming to counter your sharpest strafing without being distracted by a slowly filling stamina bar, which may be a good mechanic in other games, but here I feel like it would just distract from Incision's personality. After my first playthrough, I thought the gameplay was sort of similar to Quake, with the feel and general structure of objectives. That and this enemy just being a one-to-one recreation of one of Quake's enemies, but with clothes. It's not a problem because it's like the only case of this, so I'm just gonna assume it's just a nod to a different generation of devs. Level design was pretty cool as well. There's a lot of verticality in the earlier levels, but they also aren't afraid to put the player in a box immediately after and watch them get minced, which is a good thing, by the way. The levels are clear as well, which is nice. Landmarks are obvious, so you know when you're backtracking. Closed doors are clear, and hallways always lead to something. The amount of secrets packed into this game that affect gameplay in a meaningful way make exploring actually rewarding. Like these toilets, which I tested, and every single one is flushable. My only critique is add more jumpy things later on in the game. This game's enemies I find really good, but they also cause me internal bleeding. I think it's really cool how you go from fodder enemies being at a standstill to later on replacements, which almost match the speed of the player. I don't like when tanky enemies are too tanky, with no indicator of health. It's why I still haven't finished Shrine 2 after half a year. Bosses have health bars because otherwise players don't know if they're making progress. It's like cooking someone a meal and asking what they think, and they just respond, I don't know. Some games fix this by showing damage visually, kinda like a checkpoint in the middle of the fight. I guess it still isn't that big a deal, because this is basically just a problem with one enemy, so I'm exaggerating a little, but not as much as I wish I was. I feel like I've listed all my minimal gripes with the game without explaining how the world feels to be a part of, because that was one thing I did notice. There is a conscious effort to make the player involved. The beginning of the game has you being jumped outside of your apartment, which is lovely by the way. From that point onward, it feels like you're chasing after a movement and trying to stop this cult-like delusion that has spread over the masses. It also includes my favourite sound effect. The further you go, the more pilgrims you encounter, which serve no other purpose than to make the world more alive, not even if you kill one by accident. Each roadblock boss feels intentionally placed to get in your way. Some are traps which the player is made to force their way through, while others feel like part of the already established world which have been repurposed by whatever you're chasing to be obstructive. Everything feels like it has or had a purpose, with aspects of the environments hastily made in an attempt to stop the player. By the end of the main story, you no longer feel like a crazed gunman acting in self-defense. You've become a zealous opposition to an evil which you don't even really understand. But hey, you could just be looking the other way during all of this and you'd probably still have fun. I would say that I like the soundtrack. That's because I do. It's got variation, but it feels cohesive. Each track complements the area it's in while tying its adjacent levels. I'd say it feels industrial, but with trashy sounding organic elements. A lot of it reminds me of Mick Gordon's stuff, but that's probably just because it sounds evil. Variation is very apparent, changing the feeling of each area, like how The Hole in the Sky is more subdued and tense, in a style reminiscent of slurpcore. So the game got an update while I was making this video, so I wanted to go over some things after a third playthrough. I also missed some things like how the machine gun goes. This might actually be new, because it was shown in the new chapter trailer. I just couldn't find anything specifically saying it was. They also added cutscenes in a smaller update just beforehand. Definitely don't skip these, because they make the story so much more clear. Alright, so new update's pretty good, having been given a whole second chapter to the game, doubling the campaign's length. I feel like the devs have really come into their stride for what makes Incision. Ammo is more selectively abundant from level to level, to force players to make use of their whole arsenal. They also added the Omen Strike, which is this game's rail cannon. It has a pretty standard primary fire, but it also possesses a secondary short circuit orb thing, which you can shoot to make it explode. Seems kind of familiar. Anyway, yeah, a pretty good addition. The difficulty feels appropriate for the second half of the game. I had to be increasingly more aware of my extra lives, making sure I only use them for harder parts of the levels. I think the level design of the new levels also lends itself to good use of the player's whole arsenal, with more enemies being out of shotgun reach or just too risky to get close to. Levels also use more interactive props, like the bounce pads, like in the level Unknown. If you're on the fence, I would play this game just for this level. That's not to say the other levels are bad, though. Yeah, I don't know what that means either. It's got confusing in a good way layouts. Progression isn't unclear, it's just unclear at first by design to get the player to actually look at the environments, which makes sense because the levels are actually populated with goodies. It feels like a good midpoint between the exploration in Half-Life and the secrets in Quake and Doom. Although I did find it slightly hard to believe that the cult would have a button that explodes their holy monument. I've also changed my views on the bell ringers, because gameplay-wise they make a lot more sense with the context of the second chapter. They slow the player, which I originally thought sucked farts, because it forces a playstyle which is very one-tone, but without the practice you get from the 3 which you encounter, I don't think I would have had as much fun with the final boss. I won't show gameplay because it's a very fun reveal, but I'm glad to see it isn't just a weak spot cycle. I feel like if you want a game that you can enjoy a couple of playthroughs of, and will give you a decent challenge, here it is. It's called Survival, the Kendrick Lamar